Practical Fish Keeping, March 2021. The Butterfly Effect. It's so inactive that any guests you have around might think it's dead, but Chris Sargent thinks there's good reason to get excited for Pantadon bucholzi. If you envisage an African-inspired community aquarium, what springs to mind? A Rift Valley lake scene depicting some brightly coloured cichlids encircling their rocky domain? Maybe an Anubias heavy-cribensis layout with dithering long-fin tetras, Bricon-lestes longipinis for added authenticity. What it's not likely to include is the treasure trove of oddballs that call the continent their home. From electrogenic elephant noses and estivating lungfish through to prehistoric bikers and hulking great umbu puffers, Africa houses more than its fair share. But such fish are named oddballs for a reason. They are nonconformist, challenging the aquarist view on what the fish should do and how to care for them. And, as any community keeper knows, the last thing you want is to disrupt a settled tank by introducing some Piscean wildcard. But for some at least, having a fish that swims against the tide is part of the appeal, leaving prospective keepers in a quandary. As with everything in nature, there is an exception, and if ever a fish deserves the oddball moniker, it's the idiosyncratic African butterfly fish, Pantadon bucholzi. Taking wing. While their genus name Pantadon translates as all-tooth, in practice they are far more amicable than their binomial description suggests. Named after a Professor Buchholz, the scientist who described the type specimen, they're the only member of the family Pantodinae, part of the bony-tongue order Osteoglossiformes, an order that contains the likes of arowana, featherfin knifefish, and morimrids. Morphologically speaking, their common name is a reference to their oversized pectoral fins, and much like the wings of their Lepidoptera namesakes, butterfly fish use these to take flight. Startle one, and they engage on an aerial excursion, launching themselves clear of the water in an explosive burst of energy before gliding back down again. As well as the splayed pectorals, the elongated fin rays on the pelvic fins and the deliberately ragged caudal fin mean that when viewed from above, they're easy to dismiss as leaf litter. Get hunting. African butterfly fish are hardcore insect feeders, relying on creatures that drop into the water to make up almost the entirety of their diet. While they will eat some floating dry foods, if offered nothing else, the fish can become slowly emaciated. Fresh insects are ideal, but do come with risks. Spiders and flies from the garden are greedily devoured, but introduce the danger of feeding poisoned fare. If the flies have been sprayed with something elsewhere, or if they have eaten a toxic food source, then this can harm your fish. However, such incidences in the real world seem rare. Reptile stores may be able to provide you with some morsels. Crickets, ideally with the back legs removed, will be taken by medium to large butterflies, while mealworms and silkworm pupae provide an occasional but fatty treat. Don't rely heavily on these last two, as they are especially rich food sources and can cause obesity. Keep an eye out for the likes of dried black soldier fly and dubia cockroaches for the largest of the butterflies. Smaller fish do well on frozen brine shrimp, mysis, krill, bloodworm, and so on. Just note that once the food drops down from the surface, the fish will immediately lose interest, and you'll need to remove anything uneaten before it pollutes the tank. Sensory engines. Perhaps their most impressive adaptation is their eyes. Living just beneath the water's surface, prospective prey straddles both the aquatic and terrestrial realms, so P. bucholzi have developed highly specialized ocular organs, enabling them to see above and below the waterline simultaneously. Sporting multiple retinal hemispheres, the dorsal sections of the eyes scan across and above the surface for food, while the ventral parts serve for aquatic vision and predator recognition. But rather than aiming the eye down, they view the world beneath using reflections on the underside of the water's surface. It's not just their eyes they see with either. Fish can detect vibrations in water using their lateral line, a set of mechanoreceptor hair cells, and the sensory organ outputs of P. bucholzi link in with their visual system, meaning that they can pinpoint the minute movements of an insect on the water's surface. In conjunction with a lightning-fast response time, they flex their fins and launch towards the disturbance in as little as 15 milliseconds. So honed is this technique that they can determine the distance of a prey item touching the surface up to 20 centimeters away and time their lunge to cover that exact distance. Being crepuscular, they can also hone in on their prey under the cover of darkness. Population divergence. African butterfly fish aren't free-ranging across the continent. Instead, they are confined to the Niger and Congo basins. Their original Pantodon ancestor population split around 57 million years ago, leaving two distinct populations. But despite the respective habitats of these populations enduring major climatic and one might assume topographical changes, the butterfly fish have remained completely unchanged throughout, on the surface at least. Studies have found the two populations' genetic sequences vary by about 15%. To put that into perspective, this degree of variation is greater than the genetic differences between humans and chimpanzees. Despite this vast difference, and despite being almost identical looking, the two populations may be reproductively isolated, suggesting that they cannot even interbreed. African butterfly fish. Scientific name, Pantodon bucholzi. Pronunciation, Pantodon bucholzi. Size, to around 12 centimeters. Origin, endemic to Central and Western Africa, including Chad, Congo, Niger, Sierra Leone, Gabon, Benin, and Nigeria. Habitat, found in static or incredibly slow waters, often pools and swamps. Tank size, 90 by 40 by 30 centimeters, although a large surface footprint is far more important than overall volume. Water requirements, soft and acidic to slightly alkaline water, 6 to 7.5 pH, 8 to 12 H. Temperature, 24 to 28 degrees Celsius, though they tolerate slightly higher. Temperament, indifferent to anything it can't fit into its mouth. Feeding, floating foods, ideally fresh or frozen. Avoid reliance on flakes or pellets. Availability and cost, variable pending size, but starting at around £8.95 for small individuals. Expect to pay £12.50 or more for a substantial fish. The butterfly aquarium. Away from their backwaters of their native range, Pantodon bucholzi are not overly demanding fish, although some key criteria must be met for them to thrive in captivity. Flow rates must be kept to a minimum to replicate their natural still water environments and their propensity for taking flight. With their propensity for taking flight, a secure, tight-fitting lid is a must. Make sure there's ample space between the water surface and the sealed lid so that these surface-dwelling air breathers can snatch a breath. When they do breathe from the surface, they do so with their swim bladders, so room temperature and humidity are both important. The last thing you want is your prize oddball gulping chilled, dry, atmospheric air. Cover is also essential, with foliage in the form of floating plants providing a secure space for the butterfly fish to hide and reducing the likelihood for them taking flight if startled. For aquarists on a budget, it needn't be anything over the top, and some simple duckweed will suffice. If you're unable or unwilling to grow real plants, then plastic or silk surrogates provide a happy compromise. My own butterfly fish setup includes silk plants woven into the corners of a mesh lid to further diffuse the lighting from above. Conjuring a community. For a toothy predator, the list of compatible fish is surprisingly large. Of course, the African butterfly fish come with the caveat that any fish or crustacean that strays within its eating range and can fit between their gaping jaws, all three sets of them, will inevitably be munched. Drop down a couple of inches water depth, and interest in hunting wanes. High-speed chasers, these fish are not. For a West African feel, think cichlids like Pelviochromis or Nanochromis, morimerids such as Gnathonymus petersi, as well as African knifefish Xenomystus nigri, the climbing perches of Tenopoma, smaller cynodontists such as Cynodontis nigraventis, and the Congo tetra, Phenacogrammus interruptus. For those less fussed about an African theme, think medium-sized middle to bottom dwellers who prefer things slightly more soft and acidic. Avoid nippy fish. Certain barbs will be unable to resist the long and lacy filaments from the butterfly's ventral fins. If you want to have multiple Pentadon bacalzi specimens, ensure there is ample covered surface space to avoid territorial disputes. Feeding is straightforward, as they'll snap up whatever drops in front of them, but err more towards live aquatic foods and gut-loaded insects to provide the bulk of their diet. Get the look. African biosoaps are straightforward enough, but the Anubias Nana theme has been done to death. For a different feel to your West African biosoap, try to track down some of the following. Water sprite or Indian fern, Ceratopsis cornuta. This can either be planted in the substrate or left floating around at the surface, where it will form dense but fingery clumps. CO2 dosing and medium lighting will be enough for this plant to form a thick surface cover. African water fern, Bulbisis hudilotii. Like Java fern and Anubias, this plant can be tied to pieces of wood and take nutrients directly from the water. Ideal for positioning high up in the tank, where its dark leaves will bring a moody atmosphere. Congo Anubias heterophylla. Why not opt for a tall tank and lower the water level? Then you can grow this tall plant in a semi-aquatic state, letting the leaves break high above the water's surface. An ideal place for flies and insects to roam as a food supply for the African butterflies. Red tiger lotus, Nymphea lotus. Got a large surface area that needs lots of coverage? Grab a few Nymphea bulbs, expose them to some moderate light, and sit back and wait. The large pads will soon reach the surface and spring prodigiously, helping to keep light subdued for the fish underneath. We recommend. There are plenty of readily available African species you can house alongside an African butterfly. Some of the most common include Congo tetra, Phankogrammus interruptus, upside-down catfish, Synodontis nigroventis, and Cribensis, Pelviachromis pulcher. A rarer but beautiful find is the ornate Tenopoma, Microtenopoma, and Sorgi.